Well, good evening. Yeah, this is a project that took a few years. Of course, we didn't all suffer, but we all experienced the years of COVID, and that effectively shut down an active. We were just beginning to approach museums and archives, et cetera, for access for photographs, et cetera, and that curtain fell. And then, as life goes, you move on to other things when experience a long intermission. So this has been in the works for quite a while, and it's been a tremendous fun because we met great people who are either own these schoolhouses or manage them for exhibition purposes. There are museums, etc. From the very beginning, we felt it was important that this book serve not only a purpose of recording these structures, many of which are no longer standing, that are photographed here, but that would also serve as an introduction for people who want to go visit one. So there's a whole chapter at the end of the book devoted to the schoolhouses that have been reclaimed, repurposed, restored, and that are open to the public. And there are I believe, 9 of them. So we'll get to that in a little bit. Where I thought I'd start actually is reading the foreword by Catherine Curran. Some of you may know Kathy. She's the director of the Gardner Foundation, and which funds a number of projects, historical sorts of projects out here throughout Long Island. And I had no idea that she was a schoolhouse person. So when I mentioned that we were working on this project, she said, "Oh, can I write the foreword?" So this is what Kathy says. This is in the book. "I've always felt that the two most important yet often overlooked historic, social, and cultural influences on the growth of early Long Island were its original schoolhouses and its African-American churches. These important architectural artifacts still stand as testaments to the communities they served. They each played a seminal role in the growth of regional Long Island and, as such, New York State and America. This schoolhouse book brings together different sites, all with a similar focus, the value Long Island placed on education." So that was very kind of Kathy to write that for us, and that opened up sort of interesting possibilities programming-wise, potentially with the Gardner Foundation. So I don't know what you think of when you picture an old schoolhouse, but I thought I'd select one. This is still standing. It doesn't look quite like this anymore. But what I want to do is briefly go through the origins of the one-room schoolhouse that you may have in your mind, and then move forward into images that may surprise you, and then we'll wrap up with some images that are schoolhouses, buildings that have been reclaimed and repurposed. That's oftentimes the way these structures survive. I don't want to go too long because I know this is not a long evening. You probably all want to get to dinner eventually, so I'll promise not to. And then please interrupt at any moment if you have a question about something that I'm saying that doesn't seem clear, or you want to know more about it, and certainly at the end we can exchange some thoughts. So this is the Amagansett Schoolhouse at a site, not its original site, because it has quite a history. It was owned and moved several times. Most recently and you'll see this if you drive up Main Street in Amagansett. It has been most recently moved and restored at the corner out in front of the high school, the public school. It's there. But if you look closely, you can see it's basically sitting on rocks. It has no foundation. And this was typical and kind of lent to the portability, the mobility of these little buildings. Oftentimes, this was later bought and repurposed as a storage shed for whaling gear because the individual was, I believe, a ship's captain, and that's the purpose that he put it to. And then many years later, it was gifted to the school, and it was moved there and restored. So, okay, it is on Main Street as you're driving east. It's at the front corner on the school property. It's been restored, and it's on the right. This would date from about 1810. It was moved there about 10 years ago. We have a local expert here. About 10 years ago. I would like to say read all about it in here, but I'm not sure I have that date in here. I should mention parenthetically, if you've ever worked on one of these books, it's a lot of fun. It's a challenge because you need, first of all, you need to find hundreds of pictures to then choose from. And then you have a word count and a layout and an organization that you have to comply with. So it's ironic. In some cases, you have a wonderful image and you can find so little about that building. And then you have an adequate image and then you've got volumes about it. So you have to, sort of find a happy medium within that. So this is the old Amagansett School. And at this point, it's still retaining. I think it does to this day. Those 12/8 window sashes. Yes, indeed.
Buildings back then.
Yeah.
Not like they were power tools.
No. Well, in fact, this relative to what got moved would have been considered a kind of a piece of cake. The things that got moved in the period, sometimes they actually broke the buildings apart and put them back together again, down to the structural frame. A structure like this is small enough that a lot of very weary oxen, because what you can do, and of course you probably wait until the winter time when the ground is frozen and you're not going to be in the mud. But a structure like this is resting on sills. So there's a continuous structural sill underneath here that basically describes the rectangular shape of that building. There are 4 beams, a couple long. So that structural system is what supports all of this. And you can imagine putting that on rollers. So you can put logs and you just roll these things if you have a couple of beasts that are strong enough to tug it. So these were moved. We move buildings, bigger buildings than this, constantly. So that's a Long Island thing. This is another similar building, although this is almost, to look at it, you say, well, this is sort of twice the other one. This was in Sag Harbor. Braddock Corey, Revolutionary War patriot, returns from the front and gifts a piece of land to the village to construct its first schoolhouse. It wouldn't be this whole thing. It's the right-hand half of that. It then gets enlarged and basically mirror image. It's doubled in size. The belfry in the middle is quite wonderful. It's more associated with academies, which we'll get into briefly later on. So it's very decorative and somewhat unusual. That gets put on later. And that other sort of steeple thing in the distance, that's actually the Methodist Church, which is down Madison Street from where this stood. So that's above another building. So it's a little deceptive. Our wonderful Annie Cooper Boyd, whose house the Sag Harbor Historical Museum now occupies, took this early photo and did an imaginary painting from it. So we actually have but it was from her imagination. She would have seen this photograph and then generated a painting on the basis of it. So this is basically, this same as the other thing, just 2 of them, you might say. No, that's long gone. Yeah, that is gone. Well, the Methodist Church is still standing. Right, so this was up the street from the Methodist Church, which is, you can see behind it, like a couple of blocks to the north. So where the Methodist Church is now, if you were to walk, that's Madison Street. If you were to walk past the church to your right, you'd go another block. This was at the corner facing the old burying ground.
Facing the old what?
The old burying ground.
Okay.
Yeah. And this is looking rather dilapidated. I think it had been abandoned by that time. So I couldn't resist putting a few images like this into the book, because in the mid-19th century, there was a sort of a people who were aware of what the deficiencies were in the schooling, the school system, both in terms of the structures that the students attended, the lack of recreational facilities, you might say. And this is essentially a caricature. This is an architect, James Johannett, who is publishing a book of schoolhouse designs about 1870. And he introduces this whole book with this sort of idealized schoolhouses, what we ought to be building kind of thing, in the then contemporary style of the 1860s and 70s. But he incorporates a kind of an introduction to his whole, his treatise, describing what he perceives to be the deficiencies of schoolhouses at that time. So this may be a bit of an exaggeration, but I think it's kind of comical. The cow seemingly nonplussed in the foreground. And so the other commentary, there's a man named Henry Barnard, who is an educator, quite distinguished. He writes a number of books about, teaching principles, again, in the same period. This would be in the 1850s. And in this view, he's just illustrating, a playground for the little guys, for the infant or primary school. And because one of the great complaints in the period was the kids had no place to play. So it wasn't just what was going wrong in the classroom, and there's a lot on that too. We'll get to that. But also, these kids have no place to go. There was often a complaint that the parcel of land that was the lot that was chosen to build the schoolhouse was typically the place that nobody could really do anything else with, some rocky little corner. It also had to be within walking distance or as close to of the population that surrounded it, because these kids had to get there. So you had to meet these two criteria, and the recreational value of that site and the facilities, et cetera, were the last thing anybody's budget. So this drew quite a bit of commentary and criticism in the period. This is just one example. Now, a surprise critic of the schooling at the time was Walt Whitman, the Bard himself. He, as a young man, he's born and raised in Dix Hills area of Huntington, south of present-day Huntington Village. And like a lot of young men at the time who didn't want to do what Dad was doing and couldn't imagine having to follow in Dad's footsteps and had a little more imagination, he presents himself as a school teacher. This is at the age of 17, for example. So in his teens, 17, 18, 19, he teaches in some 8 or 9 different Long Island schoolhouses. Later in life, and so this is all grist for his mill. So later into his 30s and 40s, he writes quite lengthily about the problems with teaching, that it was corporal punishment for the most part. If the kids aren't behaving themselves, they get a whack of the head or worse. And he had a very different, of course, some critics of him accuse him of just using the position of being a school teacher to sort of interact with the kids and build his own, build his own abilities, et cetera. But he saw it quite differently. So this is Walt the Bard, probably the earliest known image of him. I tried to get an image that was close to his age, not an old bearded guy who, 50 years prior had taught school. So this is a very, very interesting early image of him. And this is one of 2 schoolhouses, as I said before, there are about 8 or 9 that are historically associated with him, where it's known from his letters and other documentation, where it's known that he taught. Now, there were 3, we would call them semesters or periods of time throughout the year. You would sign up for a winter or a spring session. There were 3 of those per year. So he taught a variety of places on Long Island. This building still stands. This was built in Woodbury, not his first assignment, but this was later auctioned off by the school district, who no longer found any need for it. This would be in the about 1930s or so. It was auctioned off to a carpenter who was going to use the boards to build something with. And a Whitman collector came along and said, I want that building. And so to this day, it was moved to a wealthy person's estate in Oyster Bay Cove, and it was repurposed as the wing of a much larger house, and it's standing there today. I had the very serendipitous opportunity I was in conversation with someone about it, and they said, "Oh, I know who owns that." I'd been searching for years, because in the period, the identity of this person was never revealed. It was like someone who collects Whitman stuff. So by sheer chance, I was introduced to the person who said, "Oh, come on over and see it." So I've seen it, so I know it's true. So it does stand. The other ones in Smithtown, I think what we would call Smithtown Branch, which is the length of road that stretches past the road where you turn north to go to Stony Brook, that's the branch. That's still standing as well, but it's been very much renovated. It's a little office building. Another wonderful discovery, we've all heard of William Sidney Mount, our very famous Long Island genre painter, whose collection was really, when Ward Melville started the museums at Stony Brook, his Mount collection was a major. That's now the Long Island Museum of Carriages and I don't know what all, but it started as museums at Stony Brook with a Melville collection of hundreds of Mounts and Mount family paintings. They'd never heard of this. Okay, this and another drawing is at the New York Historical Society, and for some reason, Mount himself drew this. And when you see, he has a floor plan also, and he has commentary about how you don't want three students sitting next to each other on a bench because one of them needs to get up and go take care of business and will disrupt the work of the other. So he has a sort of a sense of how the seating should be and things need to be improved. So this was very much on everyone's mind at the time. Meanwhile, my absolute fetish, I've been addicted to octagonal buildings for as long as I can remember. And I was delighted to know that there were actually two octagonal schoolhouses built on Long Island. One remains standing. This one does not. This was built in Yaphank. And there's usually a reason for this. The octagonal fad, I don't know if you're crazy about this, I am. It only lasted about 10 years. And it was started by this fellow named Orson Squire Fowler, who was a phrenologist. You don't want to be subjected to a phrenologist, okay? It's sort of like a massage therapist, except they feel the bumps on your head and determine what your abilities are, or coulda, shoulda, woulda. So it's this sort of mystical laying on of hands science. That's phrenology, PH. Okay. So Orson Squire Fowler, luckily his brother was in the publishing business, and so he was able to get a book published on phrenology. If you want to read up, that's the name, Fowler. Anyway, he also got off into topics that were maybe a little more socially acceptable, and his theory was that the octagon is as close, in terms of practical building, it's as close to a circle as you can get. Now, there are 12-sided buildings, okay, but 8 sides is sort of practical. And he's looking at the circle as the perfect form, the perfect shape. And in his theories, you got to read these books. He decides that, so your life will be improved, obviously, if you can live in a circle or as close to it, live in an octagon. Okay. And he's thinking that in terms of like a public space, like a church or a schoolhouse, it's advantageous because you can place the teacher in such a way and all the students can, so he has it all worked up. Okay. Well, a man named William Weeks, who was a very fascinating guy who lived in Yaphank, wealthy local farmer, but also political guy and whatnot. He believed in this. He introduced cranberry bogs. He did a lot of things in Yaphank. There's a whole thing about Yaphank. And this was there. And that's why this was built there, because William Weeks, who was the commissioner of schools, he was a lot of things. He was a very advanced and philanthropic person. So he acquired the land and built this to replace the old schoolhouse that he felt this was going to be a big improvement. We will see later another image of what happened to that. But meanwhile, so here's a typical, so these were drawn and, in architectural manuals of the time illustrating how this would lay out. So here's a typical suggestion of how you could take advantage. The school teacher's going to be down here where the desk is at the bottom, and all those students will be lined up, and they're going to take advantage of that shape, that form is going to be advantageous to them. They believed. That is, the kids all have to be listening and paying attention to begin with. Maybe, whoops, oh, I went backwards, sorry. Well, this is the Yaphank Schoolhouse that we just saw, except, well, I know. When I saw this photograph, I thought, you can't make this up. These most, a majority of these little schoolhouses outlived their usefulness for the main reason that there were populations are growing and there are too many kids. So these little communities outgrow the schoolhouse. We have more than 12 kids, So, so this one was sold to the fire department, and the first thing they did was they just cut the one bay where that sign is. That was one bay of the 8 sides, and they cut double doors into that. But then, I go into the details here. I think it's not until the 1930s when they bought a new truck, and this is in the newspaper. And there's this wonderful article in the paper about how got a new Dodge, it's a truck, and it's not going to fit. So they extended this facade so they could open the doors up to accommodate the new fire truck, which of course, oops, I touched a wire. Connor, there we go. Oh, don't touch wires. So this was a proud moment, actually, in Yaphank. And then, of course, the fire department outgrows its firehouse and needs to buy a new truck, excuse me, which is no longer going to fit. So that was torn down. Excuse me, that is no longer standing. The one that still stands is the one in Brentwood. Now, Brentwood was a wild place in the 1840s, 50s. It's called Modern Times. Okay. So it was founded as a utopian community, as in, we don't really adhere to the normal mores of how people are supposed to live together and dress or not, as the case may be. And so naturally, and they managed to get their own school district created to serve their community. And of course, they advocated for what was quite novel and advanced at the time, excuse me, which was their schoolhouse. This survives. It's been moved, and it too, like the Amagansett Schoolhouse, is sitting on the property of the local school, the high school in Brentwood. And it's been reopened, and I guess they give tours of it. This was, you can still see the dumpster in the background. I got there when they were still, hadn't put the front door in yet. So that's a fairly new restoration. But what you're probably more recognizing in terms of what comes to mind in terms of an old schoolhouse would be, this is an example. This is the Cutchogue Schoolhouse. And we can date this picture by that great bicycle that's out front. So this dates from about 1890. So this has had an interesting history. It stood, this big, wonderful church, Presbyterian church to the left out of sight. And behind that church are the wagon sheds, and I think you can see a few of those there. So this, the Cutchogue School, kind of Greek revival in its detailing. You can barely make that out. These buildings were never all that fancy. It was then moved from this site, and it was partitioned up and used as a tenant farmer's house for many years. That sort of farming practicality, waste not, want not. And so that was moved off this site out into a farm field. Then in the early 1960s, it was given to the Cutchogue, New Suffolk Historical Council, which was a newly formed historical agency there in town. which took possession of a little downtown area of Green, which is coincidentally directly across the street from where it had stood originally. And this was opening day. So yeah, Meredith was the local photographer, 1962. So and what they have, and it's in the book, they had a reunion of all the people they could track down who had gone to school there before it closed. And well, this is them plus their families. And then they took a little shot inside and they named everybody. And they're all the North Fork names, Horton, wonderful. It's quite wonderful. So this is one in the other chapter that's open, certainly open to the public.
The building have been white originally?
Probably, yes. Because, well, this is Greek revival, and that was kind of, here we are. Things are going white at that time. This is Bald Hill, but again, comparable, just this little bit of, these schoolhouses never had much architectural decoration going on because people had to appropriate the budget to build these things. And I'm sure if you brought up the word pilaster in one of those conversations, you'd be run out of town or tarred and feathered. So just the fact that you have this little bit of ornamentation, this corner board fashioned up like a pilaster, and that little architrave over the front door, that's a big deal, in schoolhouse architecture. And this remains standing. And the reason this is still standing is that by the end of the century, a whole bunch of people who had gone to school there learned that this thing was closed, it's not big enough anymore, and all the rest of it. And they got together and decided to have a picnic there every year and raise money to acquire it and preserve it. And they did. And so it still stands. It's been restored. And there's a very active historical society there. This is farming. I get my Dales and my Villes mixed up. I want to say Farmingville, but it's the Bald Hill Schoolhouse. Now, here's another one on the move. Yeah, this moving. Now, you asked a question about moving. Well, now we're out of the Oxon era, and now we're up to the contemporary scene. Here is the Southold Schoolhouse, moving down Main Street. If you're familiar with downtown Southold, you can just make out the municipal building here to the right. This is coming up through the light. This, again, was going to be demolished. This had become a machine shop. And I remember going there in the 70s, I guess it must have been. We were working on some schoolhouse, and I got wind of the fact that was still there. And I remember driving and seeing it. So it was still a machine shop at that time. It was then given to the Historical Society, and they arranged to have it moved. There it is today. They have a barn in the back. So this is now, if you drive up through Southold Village, the Historical Society has a whole complex of structures there, several houses, a granary, a whole, like a little mini Sturbridge Village, where they have brought some buildings together that were endangered. And this is one of them. Now this lonely thing, it gets pretty forlorn out there on the North Fork. The further out you get, So this was the what do they call it? The something point.
Orient.
Sorry?
Orient.
It is Orient. I'm trying to come up. It is Orient Point, but they have a name for this particular place. It had a steeple. Apparently that blew off. You can see that tree, if anything is responding to the prevailing winds, that tree is. So that darn schoolhouse, it's a miracle that it's still hanging in there. This was gifted to the Oyster Ponds Historical, which is the Orient. Oh, there we go. I better stop touching that wire. So there it is today. I guess they either had images or architectural evidence, I'm not sure, that was sufficient for them to rebuild the cupola above it, but they moved it there. They actually own two. They own this one, and they own a tiny little thing called the Amanda Brown Schoolhouse. There's an expression in the period, dame schools. Okay, a dame school was, well, I guess being a dame is be a lady of the period, an older lady who had some education, could read, could write, and would open up a school, and at very little money would advertise for children to come and learn. So it's sort of an informal education, a part of the educational system. So the Amanda Brown Schoolhouse is technically a dame school in which Amanda Brown presumably, received some modest payment for teaching the kids how to read and write.
So would she own the school?
She owned the other. That was not that. That was another. I don't. It's in the book. That's a cheap way to. But it's the other schoolhouse that they own. They were both moved to their property because, again, many of these little buildings conveniently, nestle into some larger piece of property where they can be saved. And both of those buildings are examples of this. This is the Jericho. Now we're in Nassau County. It's funny. I guess we're all Suffolk County people here. Nassau is very developed. When you drive around, it's more developed than we are around here. And that has had the inevitable consequence that most of its schoolhouses no longer stand. They just don't. They went the way of all, development. So unfortunately, there are very few examples of early schoolhouses in Nassau County, just by virtue of the way that the county has evolved and population has grown, et cetera. So this is their schoolhouse here to the right. This was an intersection in which the Jericho Meeting House is there off to the left. That still stands. Both buildings stand. And now the Jericho Turnpike is now located beyond them. The Army Corps of Engineers, of course, comes along and straightens everything, levels it. So the highway bypassed this whole little complex, and it's the south. So you have to get off the main road and snake around up to and you'll see these are still, both of these buildings are Goyles and Boys. Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, they don't all do that. They some do, some don't. There is no.
Does that mean it's down the middle?
There would have been inside, but eventually you gotta, I mean, nature takes its course. These two eventually get together. There's, no pair of doors is ever going to. It's going to happen. Okay, good. No, but okay. All right. Okay, I got to look that one up. That sounds very promising. I should have mentioned earlier that little one-room schoolhouse. If you think in terms of the 18th century, there weren't all that many building types to go by. Pretty simple. There's a meeting house, which is basically a barn. There's a house. There are mills, various mills. But the original little schoolhouse is basic. It's a one-room house, actually. And they were heated with chimneys. And there's only one example. I have it in the book. I didn't put it up here. There's only one example of that still standing, and it's in East Hampton. And it's been fairly newly moved to the site. It's behind their townhouse, which is another wonderful early schoolhouse. And it's the only example of a one-room building with a door that leads in, with a chimney inside, with a fireplace which heats the room. Got to heat it somehow. And that's what it was. It was just a one-room house, basically. That was the prototype. By this period, by the 1830s and 40s, this has gotten much larger, longer, with 3 or 4 windows and room enough for a pair of doors to separate the girls from the boys, at least momentarily.
Can I just make a comment?
Yes, please.
To defend Nassau County.
Yes.
Okay, as you know, I'm from Montauk.
Yes.
Nassau County.
Yep.
And I'm glad to see you have 2 schools, one from Seaford and one from Montauk in your book. I
Yes.
haven't gone through the whole book.
There are more.
So there is still stuff in Nassau County.
There
that
are.
not involved.
There are.
And just the last, I want to mention.
Yeah.
I was told by, the Friends Academy in Locust Valley,
Mhm.
the librarian, who said, I don't know if it's true, but she told me, she goes, the first black school on Long Island
Mhm.
in Wantagh.
Yes.
It doesn't exist anymore, but it was.
Yes.
So I just want to put some plugs in for
And
that.
thank you for that. And there are many more examples from Nassau in the
Oh,
book.
good. Yeah, I thought.
Right. And the only point I was trying to make is regrettably, so many of them are now gone. There's a wonderful one. I think I have it in here at Old Bethpage Village. And there's something kind of interesting that maybe that's coming up soon. Anyway, that's how that, it's a little house. It's lived in as a house.
And where was
This is in Jericho.
this? The school teacher would not have been provided housing.
No, no. In the early period, they boarded out. Like Whitman, he's got to find a room and like where to live. So they would be single, typically younger single people, and they would board out, typically men, up until the 1850s, 60s. It was all young men. And they would board with a local family. Modestly. Well, yeah, they were paid by the school district, so people are being taxed. In the 18th century, it's a real hodgepodge. Sometimes because there are communities that hire a school teacher, and then what they do is part of their compensation is derived from the people who are actually sending the students, and then the rest is coming from the community at large. But there was no real system. Not until New York State imposes a system in 1812. So I should have mentioned that before. So it's not until 1812 that on a state level, there is a uniform system of school districts. Okay. So the state, it's another one of these unfunded state mandates, you shall create school districts. It was unfunded. Yes, Hugh.
Is it true that some of the teachers got paid like in corn and whale oil?
They would get, in the earliest years, like in the town records, it'll show what they're being paid, and it could be in part in kind, like it was sort of their board, and so they're given a place to live, and then a little bit of money, but also some stuff, like some wood. Yeah, I mean, right? Okay, so this is the old Bethpage Village schoolhouse before it got there. This is what it looked like in the 1930s. It had been hoisted up and given another story, and it was lived in as a house. This was later saved and moved to a Nassau County park, and then Old Bethpage Village kind of came along and provided a kind of a larger sort of context for it, and it was moved again. So that's how it looks or how it looked when it first got there. This is an old photograph, but this is at the village. What's quite different about there's so few of them, there's so few images to work from, but they tend to have a very different look to them. The roof is higher, it's wider. So there's kind of it's interesting, the proportion changes. And I've noticed this among, I hate to use the word Dutch because it is so misused. But if you look at a Dutch barn, a real Dutch barn, which unlike the English barn, which has its doors on the side, okay, the Dutch barn has the doors on the end, and it has a squarer massing to it. And I just have a feeling that there's an influence there. I can't quite put, and I've never seen anybody write about it, talk about it, anything, but there's something that's quite different in the shape of this. This is late 18th, early 19th century period building, so hasn't been changed. So that requires a little more research. Now this is a crazy one, Mattatuck. And I'll show you what it looks like today because it still stands. And I couldn't believe it because I'll show it to you now and then we'll go back to this. That's what it is today. Now, when you drive by that, there's a gas station. So if you're stopping for gas in Mattituck, look across the road, there it is. It's a big barn. And like, what the heck is going on? So what's going on apparently is that the schoolhouse, just subtract the wings and subtract the brick foundation, just get to this. That's the schoolhouse. So that guy went through a torturous. So first it went up on the foundation, then it got one wing, then it got the other, and it's standing there today as a barn. They store stuff in it. Yeah. Well, it's the North Fork. A lot of farms up there. So that's what it is today. Kind of an extraordinary history. Now, this was the Southold Institute, and evidently very hard to research this. Maybe one of you knows all about the Southold Institute. It took me months to try to figure out what the heck was going on, because there are photographs of teachers. It became like a teaching seminary thing, but that's not what it was. It was, this is very much like the ethic of the academies, which was a whole other story. And I have a whole chapter about the academies because, you know, there was a time when the upper echelons of society could afford to send their sons primarily, but also potentially their daughters to school, you know, ultimately to Yale, but to get started. So there is this ethic of academies. Beginning, the earliest one on the island is the Clinton Academy, 1794. But you would need to send your child and who would board with a local family. So you had to have the means to pay for the tuition as well as sending the student out. But they would be educated. What happens to these, and there were many of them. There's one still standing in Miller Place. The one in Bellport was converted into a wonderful house. It's amazing. There was one in Southampton. They're all over the place. There was one in Smithtown. So we have pictures of these. Most of them are gone. So this is that ethic, usually 2 stories, usually some sort of a cupola rising up there in the middle that kind of says from a distance, you know, what it is. Bell tower, true. Yeah, good. And then what happens is the state education system, which was originally focused in on the younger kids in the earlier 1800s. By the 1850s and into the 60s, now the state educational system is expanding and it's developing what we think of today as high schools. And those high schools, which are being subsidized by the state, put these out of business. And so in some communities, the public school system absorbs these structurally into its footprint. And in other cases, they need to find other purposes. These are typically private ventures to begin with. The one in Southampton, for example, was shares. You could buy a $50 share. We're selling 100 shares. We're going to build, you know. And you weren't really looking for a return on your investment so much as you probably didn't want to lose any money. And you were supporting this civic. There was a big competition. Southampton Village and East Hampton Village were like, who's going to build their academy first? And East Hampton was way ahead of the curve. There's 1794. I think Southampton doesn't get around till the 1820s. And their account books are all at the Southampton Public Library in their history collection. But this one managed to survive for a little while as a church. So the center section of this church is that building. And I never would have visually, I wouldn't have made the connection. And yet this is well documented in the period that it's on the same site, but they rotated it 90 degrees. So the end wall is now facing the street and they put those little wings on, they put a bell thing on top and you got yourself a church. This becomes the Roman Catholic Church because the Roman Catholic diocese is establishing a Catholic church in Southold to accommodate its very large and increasing Roman Catholic population. And so this was a whole new thing. And to grab that old school building that's probably abandoned by them and repurpose it. So the church itself today owns this photograph. So they have the history on this thing. But I never would have seen that earlier building in that, but apparently that's well documented. So you gotta believe it. Let's see, where are we? I think we are getting close to the end. I told you wouldn't keep you here all night. Okay, this is my favorite. You know what we put these poor schoolhouses to, you know? So sometimes it's only a matter of inches, you know? And so this is a Northville schoolhouse trying to make its way onto a private person's property who acquired it to fix it up and save it. And en route, it got itself a bit squeezed under this underpass. This is, if you take, I forget the name of the route, but you're going up to Riverhead. You go past that golf course. You know where I am. You know, it's like a 6-lane highway, and this is an overpass on that road. This is trying to squeeze underneath it, coming down from the North Fork. There it is today. So this is a private owner who had grown up on the North Fork and is passionate about saving this old guy. So it's there today. And of course, we couldn't be here without talking about the district school, which was here and was auctioned off in 1907 and ended up on Wainscott Main Street in 1908. That's the chapel on Wainscott Main Street, which started as a public school right here on Ocean Avenue, built in the 1880s, I would judge, by that fabulous tower. And this was auctioned off again because it was redundant. You know, they needed to build a new school. There are more kids, this old-fashioned thing. It's not big enough, all that. So it was auctioned off, and the fire department wanted it desperately. They wanted to buy it at the auction and repurpose it for whatever their purposes were. I don't think the firehouse, I'm not sure. I don't know that they had just bought a truck, but they wanted this building. But the local improvement society outbid them, wanted this, moved it here. This is on its new site.
That's
And-
why he's got this right there.
Yes. And this later becomes, this image is actually dated 1908. We know the sale was 07. And
When was it moved, do you know?
I'm going to say 1880s. I don't know the exact date. I'm not sure if that's known. I could look at maps, might tell us. Excuse me. And then this is then later, I believe in the 30s, acquired by the Sewing Society, which still owns it. And no, tower's gone. Tower's gone. So that was my last image. So we can do questions or yes, please. Yes.
It's still in operation.
That was built. You did. I should have interviewed you. The current school, which I guess is probably dates from, I don't know, maybe 1890s, turn of the century. I'm not sure. Pretty close.
Yeah.
Hugh, behave yourself. Of course she wasn't. That was built, again, a much larger structure that was built on the site of the original one. And there's a wonderful image. There was a photographer named George Brainerd. He was a Brooklyn resident. And he was an amateur photographer, but he had all the equipment and he would get on the train. It was his hobby. He'd get on the train and he'd go out somewhere on Long Island and walk around with his stuff and sit and take pictures. He was addicted to taking pictures of old buildings. So we have photographs. New York Historical has the glass plate negatives. So I arranged, so all of the schoolhouses that he photographed that survive are in the book. And one of them is this, now there was Quogue, Sagaponack is one of them. And it was a typical, little 4 windows and a door kind of thing. And it was on the site of the present one, so they took that down. But what's fabulous about many of these, they're like babies. They all begin to look alike. I'm sorry, not meaning to offend anyone. But I mean, 3 windows and a door, it's hard to tell them apart sometimes because they look very similar. But the thing about the Sagaponic structure is the landscape. You can almost feel that the ocean is in the background because it's very flat, it's very evocative. So that photograph is in the book. So Brainerd took, I think it was 17 or so, Flanders. He took many of them because he just found them fascinating. Not just schoolhouses, mills. He took hundreds. So if you're doing any research on Long Island buildings and you're curious, New York Historical and New York Public Library has quite a few. He took hundreds upon hundreds of photographs.
Did you say
Brainerd, George B. Brainerd is the photographer. So it was important to have his work in here. Yeah.
Just in schoolhouses, like
Oh,
what's your
geez.
history, like,
The-
because of the architecture? Or-
Yes, yeah, interesting question. My partner in this project actually lived in the Flanders Schoolhouse. Kurt Kayhofer is is a co-author, and he was a teacher and an architecture student. So it was really, I'm going to think it was probably more his idea. But once you get these projects and you take hold, So the Flanders School is wonderful. Do you know it? As you're going toward Riverhead, it's before you get to the Duck. Okay, the Duck's over there, and the schoolhouse is there. It's a little private house. It's right next to the little cemetery that you drive by there. So that was kind of the inspiration. We also thought that they're disappearing still. Some of them are not, secure. They're privately owned. So it's good to record these things before they go any further. Yes, sir.
So, a few years ago, I made a renovation of a home in East Hampton, and it's directly behind the Clinton Academy. And we took the home down. This was a very unremarkable looking, home. And I understood it, roughly. Its age was, relating to the Clinton Academy. And when we took it down to the studs, it was I hadn't seen this before. The studding in the walls was like clearly cobbled from other structures.
Other stuff.
Because
Yeah.
in my theory, and it'd be interesting to try to figure out, was that it was the boarding house for the teachers.
Who taught at the schools.
Very possibly, because it had that feel like it was, very modest.
But it was right there.
Right.
We do know that just by total coincidence, at the Sag Harbor Historical Museum, we've been working on Sag Harbor in the Revolution. That's the title. Okay. So we're writing various essays pertaining to that. And what has come to light is that Sag Harbor's, we're the first this, we're the first that. Okay, it's always got to be the first. So some of which are true. So the first newspaper on Long Island, I guess, generally speaking, was David Frothingham's Herald, the Long Island Herald. This is 1791. It's very early. Well, East Hampton Library, their fabulous archives, has a letter from David Frothingham to Henry Packard Deering, then the collector of customs at Sag Harbor. And this is dated 1790, 91. Dear Mr. Deering, I've been offered a room, so I'm getting to this. Okay. Reverend Buell has arranged for me to have a room at the academy, but there's really no obvious I don't think there's bed chambers in that structure. So this may go to your theory. So here is Frothingham, because he's sort of like, I know how to print a newspaper, but I need a little help, And I also need some encouragement to sort of come here, like what's going on. So he was encouraged by Deering that this was a pretty happening place. Sag Harbor's got a bunch of people living here who will probably buy your newspaper for one thing. You're going to have something to sell. You need enough of a population who's going to spend a nickel to read what's going on. Huh? And you need a place to live. So he was proposing that he set up his print shop in Sag Harbor, but he was offered a place to stay by Reverend Buell over in East Hampton. So this was beginning to gel. This is looking like this is going to work out for me. And that was the origins of his being able to set up shop with the newspaper. But he had a place to live at Clinton Academy, which is just mentioned in passing as like, don't worry about that part. I got a place. He wasn't asking Deering if I could move into the attic, for example. He was like, I got a place to stay. I'm just wondering whether I'm going to sell my papers. And Deering writes back and recommends that, well, yeah, in addition, you could publish some booklets and things too, I mean, you got the printing press. In addition to that newspaper that you're pitching, maybe you could do some little booklets and stuff. And we have recently learned that Frothingham, publishes in 1792 a treatise on the animal cruelty. It's the first known in America, actually. And it was this fellow was at Brown or at Yale and wrote this paper when he was at school at university, and Frothingham publishes it. And so he did go into the business of printing other things than just the newspaper, but all about this in support of your theory.
Yes.
So they ought to live somewhere. Yes.
I found them.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
These shoes, like a pair of shoes.
In the wall? Okay, no, okay. That is a rabbit hole that Connor doesn't want us to go down.
Yeah.
Because there's a whole thing about shoes in the wall, but we can, that whole other talk. Okay. Sorry you brought it up. Yes.
At one time,
Yeah.
a boarding house for teachers.
Oh,
And
for okay.
in
Yeah.
the season, they were sent up to the third floor,
Mhm.
and they were allowed to.
Where the rest of the
down,
help has to.
were allowed to come down on the second floor.
Okay. In the winter. Boy, the good old days. Right. Yes, sir.
Do you have any information on the Bridgehampton Literary and Commercial Institute?
I think,
That make it into the book?
yes. Yeah. I think that's described, Munsell's history. We all have this under our pillows. Munsell is 1882, and each town has a chapter. And he goes into this amazing detail then, because he had a contemporary. Munsell is the publisher. And he talks about that. And I think that becomes a house. And you're going to tell me you live in that house.
No, it was burned down in like 1970 by the fire department. That was
By the fire department.
Yes,
Okay.
because it was full of
Gotcha.
disrepair.
Yeah.
But that was half of it, which had been moved down to Sagaponic Road.
Okay. I think, some of these files. Yeah, sure. Please. Mm-hmm.
Structure that was called what?
The Bridgehampton Literary and Commercial Institute, run by Professor Lewis Halleck.
Yes, Halleck.
Essays. That building was moved to Sagaponic?
No, Sagaponic Road. It's down past the golf course on the other
It's
side.
still in Bridgehampton,
So,
but it's on Sagaponic Road.
yes.
It's east of west of the.
Page 75.
Yes.
Bridgehampton Academy, 1859. Founded as a stock company with 50 shares offered at $25 apiece. The Bridgehampton Literary Institute was launched in 1859. We have the architect was Ichabod Sheffield Seabury. I think that may have been his only building. Haven't heard of that
No,
guy.
there's a builder out there, Seabury, right
Okay,
now.
okay, there you, okay. Sorry,
Yeah.
okay, blah, blah, blah. And Well, I should have known. I got this picture from these guys. So you got to talk to Connor. I mean, Connor? Yeah, they have the pictures. Here it is here.
Yeah.
And then,
Mhm.
yeah. So it's not quite as, this is in the chapter on academies, because typically they have a little cupola or a belvedere or a something up on the top that, you know, architecturally that makes them stand out as being institutional, as opposed to these, you know, humble little schoolhouses that, you know.
That was
So-
moved to Sangamon Road, and supposedly.
Yeah.
It was run down, became the model for Charles Adams, the
Okay,
Adams family.
yeah, well, in its dilapidated state.
Yeah.
Good.
I have watercolor of that.
Fascinating.
The Charles Adams children, those little
Yeah.
children are out in front of that very structure.
Well, then that would be the origin of that story. That's great.
I would love to see that.
He has a picture of them burning.
Yes.
Yeah.
When my
You
grandmother
see, books
died-
like this,
You're
Yeah.
She raised dogs.
Yes.
Ah, I remember.
can't make it up.
Messina? Yes.
Yeah.
There's a picture of it burning in the border house, which is right down the road from
Yeah.
the street.
Oh,
I took pictures of it once.
Yeah.
Hmm.
No one's out there anymore. So,
Deli Court, it's for sale now, has a for sale sign up.
so just before you get to the bridge for the steps.
Okay, along there.
He's doing a whole oral history project.
He needs,
You know, I mean, and for those of you who grew up out here, these stories really should be. preserved.
well, if you can leave your email or other contact information for the society, then if you're willing to talk about these things, because this is fascinating and it just disappears. So thank you very much. It's been fun.